Thank you very much, Sean. Bore da, everyone. Good morning. It's my great pleasure to be here. Now, I have written out my speech this morning, which is quite unlike me, because I think some of the points that I want to make this morning are too important to be left to chance. So, here we go. We have an unusual opportunity in Wales to learn from the past in a way that helps us to see into the future. We have, if you like, a metaphorical crystal ball. There are two countries that have taken very similar approaches to our curriculum for Wales and which implemented these curricula long before we did. They are purpose-led. They divide the curriculum into areas of learning rather than subjects, and they have moved away from specifying disciplinary knowledge and skills and instead set out student outcomes which are very similar in their framing and their level of generality to the descriptions of learning in the curriculum for Wales. Scotland and New Zealand introduced these curricula a few years before the Welsh Government commissioned Professor Graham Donaldson's Successful Futures report in 2014, which kicked off the construction of curriculum for Wales here. I'm not so interested in revisiting what happened in the first few years of those curricula, as I'm sure Professor Donaldson took all of the relevant evidence at the time into account in his report, and the Welsh Government did the same in accepting his recommendations. I'm going to share with you what has happened in the decades since, because I think it can and should inform the next steps for the curriculum for Wales. Before I do that, though, let me make something clear. Do not think, because I have an English accent, that I'm some English policy commentator that has come here to throw stones. Wales is my home. Wales is the land of my fathers. I'm the granddaughter of a Welsh teacher and the mother of Welsh children. I've worked with schools across this country, supporting them with curriculum design. I care deeply about this country, its children and its schools. And I don't want its education system to be like England's either. I agree wholeheartedly with the vision for curriculum for Wales. I just don't think that the current framework alone does enough to support schools to realise that vision. Let me tell you why. One of the reasons set out by Professor Donaldson for curriculum reform in Wales was that standards were low. Specifically, he referred to the PISA results as a reflection of those standards, which were then, and are now, in the words of our new Cabinet Secretary, Lynn Neagle, disappointing. I think there is more to education than just PISA results, despite my career history. But I do think that these standards in reading, maths and science are an important part of the bigger educational picture. And our metaphorical crystal ball suggests that the current structure of the Curriculum for Wales framework will not support an improvement in these standards. Scotland and New Zealand have both seen a steep decline in their mathematics and science PISA results over the decade or more since they introduced their high-level curricula, and New Zealand saw significant declines in reading too. This was the case even before the impact of the pandemic. Of course, that doesn't prove that it was the introduction of these curricula that caused the decline, but it does tell us at the very least that the curricular approach taken did not halt the decline, and it certainly did not improve standards. Unlike Scotland and New Zealand, when they first introduced their curricula, we don't have room for manoeuvre. Wales cannot afford to fall any further. Additional pause for thought should come from the fact that both countries are in the process of refreshing or updating their curricula, and in both cases, one of the changes they're making, or thinking about making, is reducing the ambiguity of the existing curriculum statements and being clearer about the learning that cannot be left to chance. In New Zealand, the government stated that being clear about the important learning that all Arcongan need, which is Maori for learner, is one of the crucial areas needing the greatest change. And the recommendations of a series of pilot curriculum reviews by Education Scotland, made public by TES Scotland in an article just last week, included the suggestion that greater clarity on the knowledge learners should have is needed at key points in learning. Let's take a moment to notice what it is they're changing and what they're not. Commitment to the purposes of these curricula remain. Their vision remains. What they have learned, though, is that they need to be clearer about what children need to know in order to help them to achieve those purposes. Why is it that they focused on clarity around knowledge and reducing ambiguity? I'll share two key problems that the absence of specificity has caused, which have emerged in the past decade and which are relevant to us here in Wales. The first is inequity. When the curriculum contains only high-level, somewhat ambiguous statements, it leads to variation in interpretation that doesn't only lead to differences in taught content, which needn't be a problem, but to different standards in different schools. I'll quote from a study in New Zealand in which Wilson and colleagues looked at the different interpretations of the same high-level literacy standards in different schools serving different demographics in New Zealand. Unequal opportunities for minority students and those from economically disadvantaged communities are a well-recognised and documented problem. What our findings point to is the extent to which the problem not only persists in New Zealand secondary schools, but is aided by the unintended consequences of the flexibility of the curriculum and assessment systems." End quote. In subsequently announcing the refresh, the former Associate Minister of Education in New Zealand stated, "It is critical that our national curriculum is fit for purpose and that there is a coherent system of support for its delivery by kaiko and teachers across Maori and English medium pathways. The variability, inconsistency and inequity that is characteristic of our system shows that we haven't got this right yet." End quote. Our own academics here in Wales warn of a similar risk with Curriculum for Wales. Professors Sally Power, Chris Taylor and Nigel Newton wrote in 2020, "Without wishing to question the good intentions of the government or undermine the efforts of many schools and teachers who are pioneering the new curriculum, we fear that, somewhat paradoxically, far from reducing educational inequalities, the Curriculum for Wales may actually exacerbate them. There is currently very little knowledge that all children in Wales are entitled to." And I should be clear, that last sentence was me, not them. The second problem thrown up by a lack of specified knowledge and skills is felt at transitions. Even if every primary school had high standards and high expectations for their pupils, the lack of commonality across them leads to a lack of coherence in curriculum between primary and secondary, leading to the problems of repetition and boredom for some students, confusion caused by gaps in learning for others, and potential disengagement for all. This lack of a common base was the cause of a recommendation by the OECD in Scotland to, quote, "consider how the design of curriculum for excellence can better help learners consolidate a common base of knowledge, skills and attitudes by the end of broad general education." End quote. Similarly, Education Scotland reported from their pilot reviews that participants also identified potential consequences of a lack of clarity for the position of knowledge on transitions from primary to secondary. Differing interpretations were felt to create variations in the knowledge base of learners moving to secondary from feeder primary schools. This, it was postulated, then undermined confidence of secondary staff, who then responded to the lack of a common base of knowledge by starting again. This was viewed as a potential barrier to progression. It was felt that the problems such as these could be addressed by providing greater clarity and thus consistency of what learners would be expected to know by the end of the primary stage. End quote. The introduction in Wales of 27 very high-level statements of what matter will not overcome this problem. None of this was known to be the case in 2014, or indeed in the case of that last quote, even 2 weeks ago. Before I close with some suggestions about what we might do with all of this new information, I'd like to address two more fundamental reasons why a lack of specified knowledge has been problematic in these countries, and why it will be problematic in Wales if we don't bring some in. These are the downgrading of knowledge and practice, and the importance of young people having webs of connected knowledge for 21st century skills and for reading. Way back in 2014, so in this case before the publication of Successful Futures, Professors Mark Priestley from Scotland and Claire Cinema from New Zealand warned that these new curricula could lead to a downgrading of knowledge. Their analysis of the curricula found that while both of them placed a strong emphasis on the importance of acquiring knowledge in their guidance, as does Curriculum for Wales, they are less clear in specifying what knowledge is to be acquired, nor are they clear on the processes which practitioners might follow in order to specify such knowledge. Fast forward a decade, and in a recent paper, Priestley and colleagues write, "In the lack of central specification, research in Scotland suggests that teachers fall back on instrumental rather than educational rationales for selecting content. This in turn can lead to an enacted or experienced curriculum that lacks coherence and any sense of connection with educational purposes." End quote. Already in Wales, before the introduction of the new curriculum, we had many primary schools selecting and organising knowledge from the curriculum based on the degree to which it linked to a whole school topic. Now, these topics continue to drive content selection, but this time it's the descriptions of learning that are being linked in and labelled as the knowledge in topic planning, even though in many cases these include no disciplinary content. For example, the descriptions of learning do not specify any music, and the only mention of it in the What Matters statement is as part of the sentence. By exploring forms and disciplines in the expressive arts, whether through experimentation, play, or formal research and inquiry, learners can develop an understanding of how the expressive arts communicate through visual, physical, verbal, musical, and technological means. How then is a non-music specialist supported to understand what they should or even could teach? At the moment, they do not have that support, that scaffold. The content taught in schools is therefore, to a large extent, driven by what resources are already available in school, in paid-for schemes or online. Various calls go out on the Curriculum for Wales Facebook group, like, "I'm struggling to think of some fun and interesting ideas and activities to teach a Year 2 class around the concept of adventure. Does anyone have any ideas?" And, "Does anyone have any good planning on Australia that they could kindly share, please?" In some schools, this leads to an activity-based curriculum, where knowledge is downgraded, and those disciplinary ideas which are taught are not carefully sequenced, revisited, and built upon. This is not a criticism of those schools or teachers who work bloody hard in an increasingly challenging context with little time or money for resource development or professional learning. This is an invitation to the Welsh Government to revisit a curriculum framework that doesn't currently support non-subject specialists to identify and sequence important ideas and skills in art, music, history, or geography, to name but a few. Ideas that absolutely can be taught as part of a topic, but whose inclusion is currently left up to chance. Why is this a problem? Why does it matter what children know and understand these days, so long as they have the skills? Because one of the other things to emerge over the past decade has been increasing evidence from cognitive science about the importance of knowledge for 21st century skills and for reading comprehension. This is not about learning isolated facts. In fact, I'm arguing for the opposite. Isolated facts are what you end up with if you don't deliberately plan a curriculum around progression in knowledge. To think critically about a topic, or to be creative in any domain, you need to draw on connected webs of knowledge and understanding, which students need to build up over the course of the curriculum. This means engaging with concepts like democracy, rivers, tempo, colour, tragedy, and trade, and the rich contexts through which these can be taught, starting in primary school, building on that learning in secondary school rather than repeating it, and giving students opportunities to make connections and to apply their understanding throughout. Those of you who know the Curriculum for Wales well will know that this is already the intention of the curriculum. The principles of progression include deepening understanding of the ideas and disciplines within areas, and increasing breadth and depth of knowledge. But if we are to learn any lessons from our neighbours in Scotland and New Zealand, it should now be apparent that the absence of clarity around what students should know and be able to do in the existing framework undermines these worthy intentions. And given the increasing awareness of the importance of knowledge for reading comprehension and the poor reading standards across Wales, we have an opportunity here to solve several problems with just a few moves. There is one solution to this problem which is not drastic and is entirely in line with the existing framework. Nothing needs to be abandoned or even changed. As part of the pioneer process, teachers were asked to come up with the knowledge, skills, and experiences that underpinned the statements of what matter. Some groups broke these down, outlining what progression could look like in disciplinary knowledge and skills at each progression step. However, later in the process, this valuable work was then collapsed into bulleted lists, and only some of it put in the Designing Your Curriculum section of the guidance, thereby removing any support for teachers around what disciplinary progression could look like, and reducing any commonality of learning across primary schools that could have provided a foundation on which secondary schools could build. The next logical step for Curriculum for Wales, in light of what we now know, would be to revisit that decision. Revisit the place of knowledge in the curriculum framework, and map out disciplinary progression from progression step 1 to 5 to sit alongside the descriptions of learning and to provide guidance for schools. This could then facilitate the sharing of high-quality curriculum-linked resources between schools and provide a framework for subject-specific professional learning. Most importantly, being clear about the learning that all children are entitled to would address inequalities, facilitate transition from primary to secondary school, and support schools to bring the knowledge back in, drawing on learnings from international evidence, eminent academics at home and abroad, and established cognitive science. We did not know all of this 10 years ago. We do now. We have a moral imperative to do something about it. Thank you.